भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैः सुष्ठुवागंसस्तनूभिः वशेम देवहितै यदायुः। ओम शांति शांति शांति।
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. B.P. Singh, Jalal Sharma, all other our honored guests. It's indeed a pleasure for me to extend a warm welcome to you all. And we are out here to discuss a very important subject which affects not only our day-to-day life but also our moment-to-moment life, as a matter of fact. And this subject is with regard to the good governance. Unfortunately, a lot of distortions have come in that, and one of the biggest distortions is the use of freebies, and that's what is eating up a lot of national exchequer. And to speak on such an important subject, we have no less a person than Mr. B.P. Singh, a very accomplished administrator himself. He is a member of our advisory board also, and he's held many important appointments in which he has a very varied experience. He's been a governor of Sikkim, then he's been recipient of several awards like Jawaharlal Nehru Fellowship Award, Queen Elizabeth Fellowship Award, Mahatma Gandhi National Fellow Award, Gulzari Lal Nanda Award, and then Man of Letters Award from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Over past 4 decades plus, he's held many appointments, including the Culture Secretary and the Home Secretary of the Government of India, and has also been Executive Director and Ambassador to the World Bank. He has authored many books. One of them he spoke about, and that was the subject of Bahuda here in Vimarsh itself. We later on published it in our website, and I'm very happy that it got a very good response. As a matter of fact, one keeps getting a large number of hits on that. So that at least proves one point, that a lot of people read what is written, and if it is written well. So before I hand you over to the distinguished speaker, a few words which all of us would have an opinion, so I have on the subject. Prime Minister Modi, when he took over, made a statement that I believe government has no business to do business. The focus should be on minimum government but maximum governance, and words could be more true. As a matter of fact, this is something like what J.R.D. Tata also said, government has no business to do other than just go and make policies. And he got the essence right. Whether it is happening or not, that is for us to now analyze. And why is it not happening if it is not happening? Or why is it happening if it is happening is also for us to see. One point is there that you can govern only with the help of a bureaucracy. And while the leaders have a reason, the responsibility to draw out policies for the country is for the bureaucracy to assist them to implement. Whether they've been able to do their job or not, or the politicians have failed, that is again another point I suppose the speaker will talk about. But commonly mentioned points are, the bureaucrats today are acquiring powers themselves and not delivering, and the government likes to do, but the bureaucracy is the bane. The second is, issue is, which is also very rightly, which is true, and all of us who have experience in the governance, in the matters of governance and in being in the government, do understand very well that the political leadership also does not use the bureaucracy well. Perhaps they are using them a lot for their meeting their own requirements and purposes in helping them sort of come back to power. That is the most important thing for them. And the third thing is, perhaps the bureaucracy is adopting a play-safe attitude, because one is not very sure, and this point has been discussed in this institution quite often, that you are not very sure. You may be called up, hold up 10 years after your retirement, 15 years, to answer a question about a subject you would have long forgotten. because it is perhaps not that important at that time, and it is like one of the many decisions which has been taken. And the RTI, which was much heralded by the last government as a very major success, I do not know whether it has been a success story or it has also led to the problems which are being confronted by us today, because every decision can be questioned. And it can be in the public domain as to why a decision has been taken. But having said this, I must also say that there have been periods of good governance, the most notable of them being the economic policies of 91, when we moved away from the Hindu rate of growth to a very healthy state of growth, and then that carried on for good almost 18-20 years, and the country prospered. As a matter of fact, just before coming here, in my room we were discussing that the prosperity is to that extent that the number of scooters and cars you have on daily roads, you can't even move in your own lanes, in your own, next to your houses don't have a parking place. That is the story of every town in India. So the prosperity has come about, surely, and obviously it has been a result of good governance. So one can't only talk in terms of negatives. The present Prime Minister, because that concerns us because they are the government in power, has seized the importance of good governance well. He's coined a very good mantra, very good at giving names and recognition to the thoughts. And them, out of them, one is talked of is the citizen first. Citizen first, that is true. That will be a very good approach, should it be sort of made to work and put into place. One more thing before I leave, and that is the aspect of the politicians using the freebies for their own purposes. You see the Tamil Nadu elections we had recently, you had the West Bengal elections, Punjab electricity is free. You don't get electricity, but the electricity is free. And who's misusing it is the corporate theft of electricity. So things of that kind are also happening. So there are contradictions on both sides. So the dilemma as far as we are concerned in this country is as to what is good governance all about and how can it be achieved. And I suppose this is a puzzle which everybody is trying to solve in this country, and I'm sure Mr. B.P. Singh will throw light on it and express his views, and let us see as to how do we react to those views. Thank you very much, and on to Mr. B.P. Singh now. Thank you.
General Vij, distinguished friends, ladies and gentlemen, let me at the outset greet you on the eve of Raksha Bandhan and Sarad Purnima that happens tomorrow. Friends, I have chosen to speak on a subject of contemporary interest and importance: freebies and good governance. I deliberately withheld the umbrella in suggesting the title of the talk that provides both inspiration and legitimacy to freebies and good governance in India. And this is the concept of welfare state. This objective was unfurled in the preamble of the Constitution itself, that prescribes that the state will secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic and political. Articles 38 and 39 of the Constitution, under directive principles of a state policy, go on to make it explicit when it provides, and I quote Article 38, "A state to secure a social order for the promotion of welfare of the people. The state shall strive to promote the welfare of the people by securing and protecting as effectively as it may a social order in which justice, social, economic and political shall inform all the institutions of national life. 2. The state shall in particular strive to minimize the inequalities in income and endeavored to eliminate inequalities in status, facilities and opportunities, not only amongst individuals, but also amongst groups of people residing in different areas or engaged in different vocations. Article 39 goes to elaborate it further, and it categorically states certain policies, certain principles of policy to be followed by the state. The state shall in particular direct its policy towards securing that the citizens, men and women, equally have the right to an adequate means of livelihood, that the ownership and control of the material resources of the community are so distributed as best to subserve the common good, that the operation of the economic system does not result in concentration of wealth and means of production to the common detriment, that there is equal pay for equal work for both men and women, that the health and strength of workers, men and women, and the tender age of children are not abused, and that citizens are not forced by economic necessity to enter avocations unsuited to their age or strength. And last, that children are given opportunities and facilities to develop in a healthy manner and in conditions of freedom and dignity, and that childhood and youth are protected against exploitation and against moral and material abandonment, unquote. In my view, Article 38, besides highlighting the role of the state to build a social order for the promotion of the welfare of the people in many ways, goes on to make the preamble of the Constitution itself a directive principle of a state policy. These two articles have the object of securing a welfare state in India in a background. The situation in India at the time of the commencement of democracy was one of social inequality. This point was well made by the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution of India, B.R. Ambedkar, in the following words, and I quote him. On the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy, which the Assembly has so laboriously built up, unquote. During the discussion on the directive principles of state policy, one amendment was moved in the name of Damodar Swarup Seth, who wanted the existing Article 39 of the Indian Constitution to be amended specifically to say, and I quote, the state shall endeavor to promote the welfare, prosperity, and progress of the people by establishing and maintaining democratic socialist order, unquote. Though this amendment was turned down, but it drew the attention of the House to the extent that it was extensively debated. The merit of the argument of Damodar Swarup Seth and others was not lost. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was impressed with the progress in the Soviet Union and also with the ideas of Fabian socialists. There were several others similarly concerned with building a new India. The first significant step was taken, and I see some people from Bihar, in the wake of the Supreme Court judgment declaring the government of Bihar's move in 1950 to abolish zamindari in the state as ultra-virus, as it was an infringement of the individual rights guaranteed under Articles 14 and 19 of the Constitution. The Government of India acted with imagination and promptness and amended the Constitution to provide for Article 31A in the chapter on fundamental rights and the 9th schedule that flowed therefrom. It provided that amendment of laws by state legislature and parliament for acquisition of estates, takeover of corporation, etc. cannot be challenged on the ground of alleged infringement of Article 14 or Article 19 of the Constitution. Freebies and subsidies, to draw meaning and content from these provisions of the Constitution, appropriately at times, inappropriately on other occasions, but never illegally. The dictionary meaning of freebies is something that is given to you without you having to pay for it, especially as a way of attracting your support for or interest in something. It is best expressed in colloquial Hindi as muft, upahar, or fokat kamal. Today, freebies cover a wide range of goods and services, and it is given by each state of the Indian Union to their citizens. Free or subsidized goods and services range from Amma's canteens in Tamil Nadu to Nitish Kumar's bicycles in Bihar, to items such as colored TVs, cell phones, mixer grinders, laptops, buffaloes, cows, goats, Mangal Sutras for the brides-to-be, and several others. At the time of elections, this list gets bigger. The nomenclature of subsidy denotes another kind of freebies. It is a form of financial or commodity support extended to an individual or to a business firm with the aim of promoting economic growth or social welfare. Subsidies are granted both by the Government of India and the states for purposes of manufacturing, export, transport, and for promotion of a number of other social, educational, and cultural objectives. The Economic Survey of the Government of India, placed before Parliament on 27th February 2016, that is a few months earlier, made a startling admission that India's rich feed of subsidies worth over rupees 1 lakh crore a year that are meant for the poor. And it goes on to say that this figure only considers the subsidies of 6 commodities: kerosene, petrol, diesel, electricity, LPG, and aviation turbine fuel, 2 public utilities, railways and electricity, and 1 small savings scheme, Public Provident Fund. It made another startling disclosure that the super rich who represent the top 1 to 2% of the population also get subsidies. For example, the rich consume 98% of the gold in the country, and yet gold is taxed only 1 to 1.6%, the center and the states combined. These freebies or subsidized facilities may be useful per se, but do they really subserve the objective of the welfare state as envisaged by the framers of the Constitution? Or are they primarily targeted at electoral gains? Or does it promote the image of the party in power, or are aimed at promotion of personality cult of the leader in office? Do the allocation of funds on the pressing questions of reforms in police, judiciary, civil administration, education and health get sidelined as politics promotes freebies and subsidies? In recent years, the concept of welfare state has received several meaningful contents. In 2004, the United Progressive Alliance, UPA, led by the Congress party, came to power at the center with Dr. Manmohan Singh as Prime Minister, it decided to set up a new National Advisory Council in addition to the existing Planning Commission to play a leading role in designing welfare initiatives as part of the government's minimum program, common minimum program. This was an institutional arrangement where the voice of the civil society activists was accommodated in formulation of rights-based policies. This led to a phenomenal change both in the content of the welfare programs and in its scale. Right to employment via Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, Manrega, right to education, right to information, and right to food were codified and put into operation. In 2014, the National Democratic Alliance, NDA, government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, came to power and has since embarked upon a series of schemes to ensure financial inclusion and social security of the people. The ambitious Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana and Mudra Yojana are in many ways some of the world's most successful financial inclusion programs. In fact, the JMM Trinity, Jan Dhan Yojana, Aadhaar and mobile telephones have facilitated implementation of several programs. The number of account holders in banks have grown tremendously, including in its fold persons who never had any bank account. Similarly, banks have dispersed loan for generation of employment under micro, small and medium industries. Under the direct benefit transfer, the identified beneficiaries are directly getting transfer of money from several schemes of the government. To universalize social security, the government has started 3 new insurance and pension schemes which provide insurance cover to hitherto uncovered sections of society. The second green revolution has been launched in the eastern states. For farmers, there is an ambitious Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. The government has also inaugurated Make in India programs, which is generic in character. In addition, we have ambitious programs for smart cities and modernization of 400 railway stations. All these and more take us to governance. What is governance? There is no one accepted definition of governance. Conservatives and the liberals, centrists, socialists and communists all have differing views. For example, the World Bank, where I was an executive director for 3 years, has sought to take a middle position by defining governance broadly as the traditions and the institutions by which authority in a country is exercised. This includes 1. The process by which governments are selected, monitored and replaced. 2. The capacity of the government to effectively formulate and implement sound policies. And 3. The respect of citizens and the state for the institutions that govern economic and social interactions among them. No theory of governance can be intelligible unless it is seen in the context of its time. In the beginning of the 21st century, it has become evident that those who want minimal government have an upper hand over the advocates of the paternalist welfare state. But there is no runaway success in sight. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has therefore taken the position of minimum government and maximum governance. In my view, governance in the Indian context implies that the government will provide every citizen facilities and opportunities that are vital to lead a decent life, such as maintenance of peace and security of life and property and rule of law. 2. Infrastructures like roads and bridges, electricity, drinking water, telecom and means of travel. 3. Good education and skill development institutions. And 4. Employment avenues in government, private sector and the market. It is also increasingly understood that governance is not only about political institutions and economic systems, but also relates to cultural values and belief patterns of people. Good governance demands harmony between cultural, economic, and political forces. An awakening of the aspirations of the people for a better life is at the center of this discourse. In view of the deep-rooted social and economic inequalities for centuries, India cannot blindly follow the capitalist model of growth that puts excessive reliance on market forces. For such a model would fail to provide stability to Indian polity. And yet, rapid economic growth is essential to meet the aspirations of the Indian youth. Placed in these circumstances, we have to devise ways and means that secure both faster growth as well as an approach that is in conformity with Articles 38 and 39 of the Constitution. People in several democracies, including India, are dissatisfied with the working of the key democratic institutions, and it is widely believed that the governments are functioning at all levels without significantly addressing issues concerning the dignity and welfare of ordinary citizens. The rich and business houses get such policies adopted by the government which help them promote their interest. There is also a feeling that authoritarian governments like China grow faster, deliver better, and are able to maintain higher levels of growth. The ground situation has undergone a rapid change in the last 7 decades in India. Democratic India has moved beyond periodic elections towards good governance. Let me now look at India's aspirations and India's ground realities. India's political leadership, policy makers, and business brains are actuated by a strong desire to make the country an economic superpower in the 21st century. The imperatives of democracy, however, are forcing Indian political leadership to look deeper into the causes of poverty, inequality, and suffering of the common man. As a young child in my village Bihat in Bihar, I used to hear the slogan of the left parties calling for roti, kapra, or makan. Today it is naukri, paisa, or makan. The power to take a decision on these issues is also shifting from decision makers in government towards many actors outside of government. Problems are getting increasingly complex. On most occasions, there are political sensitivities to be kept in view while formulating policies. Implementation too are in the domain of a number of ministries, departments, and calling for coordination. The nature of government priorities too are changing. To these issues are being added major infrastructural and service delivery challenges in important areas like health and old age care, creation of new cities and towns, and sustaining of the existing ones, quality of education, and skill development. The challenge relating to policy making and good governance do not directly emanate from globalization or information technology. These, however, do create problems of adjustment, of having the coherent course as change is getting facilitated increasingly through economy and new technology in societies. It is felt that innovation useful to bridge boundaries would be needed for governance. Another area of significant challenge is to make citizen services capable for interacting meaningfully not only with government players but also with communities. What are the ground realities? As we look at the situation on the ground, in India's 29 states and 6 union territories, there are huge problems of imbalanced development, poor education and health infrastructure, unemployment, and several others. I selected 5 states of our 5 regions: Maharashtra in the west, Tamil Nadu in the south, Punjab in the north, West Bengal in the east, and Assam in the northeast. I was also influenced in the selection by pioneering role that their capital cities have played not only in the development of their state, but of the entire region and at times beyond. Mumbai in the west, Chennai in the south, Kolkata in the east, newly built Chandigarh in the north, and expanding city of Guwahati in the northeast. The following statistics would reveal that freebies and subsidies have resulted in considerably reducing the plan size of these estates and an exponential growth in the non-plan expenditure. Assam, which has a population of 3.12 crores, its plan size I am quoting the figures of 2015 and 2016. Its plan size was 26.43 billion and its non-plan size was 222.25. Maharashtra, with a population of 11.24 crores, its plan size was 71.64 billion, while its non-plan size was 612.35 billion. Punjab, which has a population of 2.77 crores, its plan size is 6.9 and its non-plan size is 114.79. Tamil Nadu, with a population of 7.21 crores, its plan size is 64 billion, while its non-plan size is 438.98 crores. West Bengal, with a population of 99.13 crores, its plan size is 49.09 crores and non-plan size is 430.11 crores. Freebies and subsidies have also contributed to enormous increase in the debt of these estates. And I am giving you figures of 2 years, 2015 and 2016 separately. Assam, which is 90-10, you know, the special category estate, despite that, its debt liabilities in billions, 354.80 in 2015, 399.80 in 2016. Maharashtra, its liability is 3459.90 billion in 2015, 3,793.20 billion in 2016. Tamil Nadu, 2049.5 billion in 2015 and 2352.60 billion in 2016. And West Bengal, its debt liability is 2843.30 billion in 2015 and 3088 billion in 2016. My inquiry about these estates has also revealed disparity in income of their citizens and widespread poverty and inequality. The per capita income statistics as of 2014-15 would reveal that in Maharashtra the per capita income is in rupees 1,29,235, Tamil Nadu 1,28,366, Punjab 99,578, West Bengal 78,903 and Assam 49,480. The per capita income of persons living in Assam, where I served for long years, and West Bengal is below the national average of 93,293. The situation is more alarming in my home state Bihar, where the per capita income is only rupees 36,143. It looks more startling when I compare Bihar with Sikkim, where I served as governor for 5 years, as it is there the per capita income is 1,76,491. Along with this disparity in income, there is widespread inequality in each of these 5 states. For example, in Assam, the Assamese caste Hindus are rich compared to the Boros, the Assamese Muslims compared to migrant Bengali Muslims, the Marwaris compared to tea garden labor, and so on. This is also true of other 4 states. I am also aware of the fact not only in India but other countries of the world have also been facing the problem of subsidies. The phenomenon of energy subsidies is a case in point. In Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia and Egypt, energy subsidies alone account for more than 10% of the economy. In India, several state electricity boards have become defunct because of subsidies. India is decentralizing, including in terms of resources, as duly reflected in the award of the 14th Finance Commission, where the share of resources of states has been increased from 32% to 42%, and that the states can progress faster if there is judicious use of resources. It is true that in the 21st century, India's record in lifting people below poverty line to lower middle class is remarkable, as about 200 million people have upgraded their class. But about 200 million persons remain below poverty line. The productivity norms of railways, banks, posts, and of the public sector enterprises of both the center and of the states are low, and this aspect of the matter needs to be looked into energetically. However, some freebies and subsidies are essential and need to be continued. For example, the public distribution system covering essential consumption articles has been in operation in each state throughout the period of democratic governance in India and needs to be continued and modernized. I am an admirer of Manrega, although I am aware of the fact that the economists of the Planning Commission and mandarins of my own IAS fraternity were not at all enamored of it. In fact, they thought it will be a wastage of scarce public resources. However, Manrega, thanks to political leadership, came into force on 2nd February 2006 in 200 districts and extended to the whole country on 1st April 2008. It provides basic entitlements to rural workers like work on demand, minimum wages, payment of wages within 15 days, basic work site facilities and an employment allowance, etc. The beauty of this program lies in the fact that in rural areas, an adult male or female can seek work at the local panchayat office, and this is to be given for a period of 200 days in a year. What I have liked in the system is that the choice is that of the person, and it is near the home of the job seeker. If this program succeeds in creating assets for the poor, it can also help regenerate the natural resource base and enhance connectivity. My interactions with the villagers have revealed that Manrega has freed farm laborers from two kinds of exploitation. And I know several persons sitting here have deep connections with the villages, as I have. First, the practice on the part of the landowners to enter into some kind of agreement with the farm laborers of his village to work for the entire season at a very low rate has virtually ended, except in exceptional circumstances or on account of traditional relationships between the two sides. Second, Manrega in some ways has accorded the sense of dignity to the farm laborers, and to some extent it has generated some degree of equality between the landowners and the farm laborers, as both are dependent on each other. This has also enhanced socialization between the farm laborers and the landowners at the time of marriages and other community festivals. An important aspect of freebies relate to where some communities receive better access to these facilities than others, and this has led to emergence of a class of political activists, and I feel that it has enhanced the stakeholders in democracy in the country. Dividing line between welfare state and populism is getting blurred. There is an imperative requirement for articulation of the concept of the welfare state by both leaders and scholars. In the early years of the Republic, senior leaders of the government engaged the public in their meetings and through other media channels to articulate the vision of the welfare state. Prime Minister Modi, on his part, is doing that in his public meetings and also through his radio programs. This, however, needs to be made broad-based in order that public discourse takes place at level of states and panchayats as well. My scholar friends too need to share their perspectives. howsoever divergent they may be from one another, to guide the decision makers as to how a welfare state in a developing economy like India should function to realize the dreams of the leaders of the founders of the Republic and how to meet aspirations of the young and the needy in the 21st century. Despite the passage of 2 years, the Niti Aayog, which functions under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister with chief ministers of the states as members, has not yet been able to formulate the national vision policy. Would the national vision policy, which Prime Minister Modi has rightly called a transformative step in the offing, chart a roadmap for India's development for the next 15 years and also lays the foundation for the country's growth over the coming decades of the 21st century? The need to give quality education and skills to the youth and health coverage to all are also basic to building a strong and modern India. The building of infrastructure like roads, schools, hospitals, and institutions of governance are paramount requirements. I hope the energy of administration will not be frittered away on formulation and implementation of programs aimed particularly at electoral gains. All these take me to the next segment of my presentation, what to do. The 21st century could see the end of poverty and malnutrition as we know today. All nation states, authoritarian as well as democratic, are actuated by a strong desire to eradicate poverty. In this wider context, the recent insertion of social media in public affairs is rapidly changing the character of governance. Social media, represented through Twitter, Facebook, SMS telephony, email, and other connections, facilitate a more transparent dialogue between people and their government. Properly applied, it should mean empowerment of people, increasing accountability of officials, and the development of solutions to major challenges of governance. It is therefore vitally important to build new patterns of relationship between social media and government. The most formidable challenge facing India, besides eradication of poverty and providing meaningful employment to the youth, relates to giving every child quality education and health care facilities. The state should deliver the quality education to all at the level of primary and secondary education. The quality of education in most of the state-run schools is extremely unsatisfactory. The well-to-do sections of our society do not send their children to these schools, and even lower middle-class parents are also keen to send their children to private schools. In fact, some families who have come up the economic ladder from abject poverty are spending more on health and education of their children than ever before outside the government's system. To this is the question of technologically unemployable youth. A new class division is taking place between the web people, those who can handle the internet and other instruments of technology, and others who cannot. I hope the new education policy would move the government, center, and the states to meet these challenges. Similarly, the basic healthcare facilities should cover all age groups in terms of national health policy. Issue of vouchers by the state for medical treatment could be favorably considered for the poor and marginalized sections of society. The Prime Minister has made some announcement on 15th August from the ramparts of the Red Fort in this behalf. All these should lead to increased allocation of funds on education and health. In this background, we need to comprehensively address the following 10 matters concerning political, administrative, and media affairs to secure good governance in India. 1. Decentralization of power as well as the schemes from the center to the states and from states to the panchayats and local bodies needs to be vigorously pursued. Accountability of each body responsible for implementation should be clearly stipulated, keeping in mind various layers of administration. Further, panchayats and local bodies should be empowered not only with funds but also with competent staff. 2. State-sponsored development programs must aim at reduction in poverty and improvement in productivity level of workers. Poor people need to be directly involved to make these programs successful. Public expenditure review meetings need to be organized periodically at village, sub-district, and district levels to ensure proper utilization of funds and ownership of development programs by the people. 3. Civil service should be given clear responsibility for delivery of services in respect of approved schemes and held accountable for the same. Decision making has become difficult because of the power of the institutions like the CVC, CBI, judiciary, and CAG. Good and honest bureaucrats fear that the decisions taken in good faith will be questioned at a future date. In the circumstances, a transparent mechanism should be created to protect the honor, reputation, and lives of honest public servants as well as businessmen and politicians. 4. There should be fusion of technology at all levels of administration. The use of the internet and mobile technology should be new instruments for ensuring quality delivery of services. Computerization of records is a prerequisite for application of technology for good governance. 5. Elections to state assemblies should be held along with those of the Lok Sabha. This matter has been in public domain for quite some time, and it has gained more ground recently. In December 2015, a parliamentary standing committee recommended a move in this direction by streamlining elections in 2 phases, one concurrent with the Lok Sabha elections, the second in the midterm of the Lok Sabha. It concluded that such a reform was important for India if it is to compete with other nations in development agenda on real-time basis as a robust democratic country. Prime Minister Modi has supported the idea and has called on the Election Commission to take the proposal forward to reach a consensus. In my view, the date of assembly elections could be advanced and some of others could be postponed to coincide with the Lok Sabha elections. The power of the Election Commission to prepone or postpone elections to coincide with the Lok Sabha elections by a period of 6 months, this is the existing power, should be enhanced to make it 12 months. This will not require any constitutional amendment, and the objective of holding simultaneous elections can be substantially achieved within the next years or so if it is started straight away. 6. Partial state funding of elections should be commenced urgently. The Election Commission may be authorized to disburse the money to political parties and independent candidates on the basis of percentage of votes secured by the party and the candidates in the previous elections. The quantum of money and the eligibility figure in respect of percentage of votes secured by the party or by the candidate of a political party or the independent candidates could be discussed with political parties and formula devised. No funds should be given to new parties and individuals, but they would be free to contest as usual. We have seen mushrooming of political parties in the time of elections, and that too mostly on paper. A cap on money to be spent by a political party in support of its candidates should also be formulated. Today there is no cap. 7. 1/3 of seats in assemblies and parliament should be reserved for women. 8. MP lads and MLA lads scheme should be abolished, as this is not a legislative function, and it also diverts the attention of the people's representatives from exercising effective watch over the activities of the executive. 9. Person charged seated by a competent court for heinous offences and corrupt practices should be debarred from contesting elections. And 10. The increasing role of media in governance is welcome, but at the same time the growing menace of rapid news, particularly at the time of elections, needs to be firmly dealt with. A suitable legal framework needs to be impartially enforced by the Election Commission and where required by the police and the magistracy. These are my 10 suggestions. I hope this gets some public notice. I have deliberately left 3 areas of vital concern: the strengthening of judiciary, eradication of corruption, and police reforms. I commend the leadership shown by the Chief Justice of India in the strengthening of judiciary and cooperation required of the government in this behalf. India Against Corruption movement started by Anna Hazare is an unfinished business, and the ball is firmly in the courts of the government of India and the states. As regards police reforms, I urge the Union Home Minister and Chief Minister of States to share the plan of action through comprehensive statements in Parliament and respective state legislatures, keeping in view the pronouncements of the Supreme Court of India and administrative reports on the subject. Today we need innovators in two areas in particular, women and livelihood programs. First, women are key to good governance. Their increasing representation in democratic institutions has provided stability to Indian polity, and more should be done in this behalf as mentioned earlier. Increase in women's participation in economic field will not only boost the country's economic growth, but it will also help realize the goals of eradication of malnutrition and the lowering of the birth rate. Women, being constructive, creative, bring sustainable solutions to the table as educators, caretakers, and leaders. The second parameter relates to generation of employment and livelihood. The Indian democracy would come under stress if the economy is not suitably energized to create meaningful jobs in the formal sectors as well as of industry and service and in informal sectors. Livelihood is also connected to the social economy and local resources. It would be in upgrading existing and traditional skills that people have possessed from time to time, immemorial in agriculture, in animal husbandry, in fishing, in textiles, and so on. Investment in upgradation of such skills would lead to a harmonious relationship with nature. It is also through work that a person can plan the way in which this ambition can be fulfilled. With regular work, life is no longer just about survival, but about investing in a better future for one's children. Above all, when one has regular work, there is an incentive to maintain a stable society. Several states have formulated Right to Public Services Act that guarantees time-bound delivery of services for various public services rendered by the government to the citizen and provides mechanism for punishment of the errant public servant. This, coupled with All India Right to Information Law and constant vigil by the print and visual media and a rapid growing social media, have given new content to the concept of good governance in the country. You have heard me with patience. Let me now conclude. Distribution and disbursement of freebies take away a lot of time and energy of the administrative machinery. Freebies are visible and make instant impact on the electorate. Comparatively speaking, subsidies are silent thieves, but it could damage the vitals of an organization. The case of electricity boards is a shining example. The debt burden of a state too is directly related to this. Political parties are virtually competing with each other in enlarging the scope of freebies and subsidies. Thankfully, there is move to give subsidy only to the poor and marginalized. This needs to be supported by all political parties in parliament, in assemblies, and at public platforms. Media has to play a constructive and non-partisan role of vigilance over expenditure of public finances, particularly when neither judiciary nor the CAG can look into policy decisions of the cabinet in these areas. The twin national goals of building a strong economy and to reach its benefits to the common people need to be pursued in harmony and with imagination. Towards this, public policy needs to be improved. And this could be done best when bring the public as participants in the decision-making process. I have termed information and communications technology as a civilizational process. Although technology is not destiny, but its assistance is necessary both in the strengthening of the modern economy, needed in the accomplishment of the task that Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation, prescribed to wipe tears from every eye. Innovations are taking place in the government, in the market, and in civil society. Social and political process is getting increasingly interlinked, changing the character of elites in the countryside. In the process, the high caste of elites of the 1950s have increasingly lended space to intermediate caste landholders and businessmen, and also holders of administrative and political offices. The nature and content of good governance would undergo further change in tune with rising expectations and fresh demands of the people. I am aware that 1 billion mutinies are taking place in the country almost on a daily basis. I am also aware that billion negotiations are taking place in the country of 1.25 billion people. The need is to exponentially expand the frequency and reach of these negotiations to cover the entire population. We can draw some lessons from the manner in which 4 Asian countries acquired economic power: Japan, Singapore, South Korea, and China. The Japanese miracle is largely due to their technological prowess and organizational abilities. Singapore through exemplary leadership and discipline. South Korea through new village development movement and a strict enforcement of laws, and China on account of focused government policy, leadership, and the Communist Party. We in India have focused leadership at the center and in several states. There is a high level of integrity at the center, and several of our chief ministers are persons of sterling integrity and committed to people's welfare, belonging to different political formations. The real issue is India moving forward? Are we indeed in a transition state moving towards better governance? I am inclined to answer in the positive. The political leadership, new awakening in the institutions of governance, independent character of judiciary and other institutions give me hope. This optimism is also based on the fact that the people of India, particularly the youth, want their institutions of governance to be imbued with sensitivity towards public aspirations and needs. Political executives, industry leaders, and government servants must pay heed. The non-negotiable and inescapable conclusion is that the government, civil society organizations, and the market need to act in concert. This is possible when we have harmony between forces of democracy, culture, and administration. I believe that both institutions and individuals are important. Institutions mold character, and individuals provide resilience and flexibility to institutions. For realization of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas calls upon our wisdom and our energy. We have to realize that the tide of economic reforms has not lifted all boats. It has not given meaningful employment or a life of dignity to everyone. In the circumstances, the need is to empower our citizens and also our leaders to live in harmony and to spend their energies working for genuine development that provides both employment and dignity to everyone. This ethos is best captured by poet Nagarjuna. I am sure all of you must have heard, when he sings, "The sun that is shining on the new sky," that is the sky, that sun is economic aspirations, economic reforms, and promises, "The earth that has acquired the fresh glow contains my light as well." In Hindi it says, "नए गगन में नया सूरज जो चमक रहा है, ये विशाल भूखंड आज जो दमक रहा है, मेरी भी आभा है उसमें." Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of a very engrossing canvas which has been covered by Shri B.P. Singh. Now we have a question-answer session, but I'm afraid not more than 10 minutes because we will finish in time.
At the same time, the cloud of secrecy in which judiciary functions is definitely a cause of despair for the democratic institution of this country. On these 2 points. Thank you.
Okay, I think what we will do is take a couple of questions together and then get to him. Yes, Mr. Nath. Mr. Nath, please. No, sorry, I'll come back to you. My mistake. Sorry. Yeah, but
Thank you, sir.
very briefly, please.
Honorable Speaker, sir, I have a small question. You have put freebies and good governance. Are they contradictory? So, if you want to ensure good governance, how do you think of freebies as a reality?
You said that the government is thinking to work in the field of providing quality education, right? So, are you planning to do something for the privatization, against the privatization of the education? And the second thing is that US provides too much subsidies to its farmers, and India has even put a heavy hand on Manila. So, how do we see it?
Let me answer these 4 issues raised by 4 persons. Poverty eradication is taking place, as I said, but population is also rising, and the rate of growth or the fertility rate among the poor in India is slightly higher than among the middle class and higher. Now, the Bangladesh experience, our own experience shows that the fertility rate comes down once prosperity comes, education comes. And I'm sure that, although I have said by the end of the 21st century, but much before we would be able to see, maybe in our own lifetime, we are all 70 plus, many of us, in our own lifetime, we will see that poverty that we saw when we were young civil servants will not be there. You talked about openness of the judiciary. Great hope and secrecy go ill together. I don't think so, because I don't see much secrecy in the judiciary. Judicial appointments, yes. But when the courts are open, and the lawyers are, and I think all those people who have come to India and seen the working of the Supreme Court of India, they are very, very impressed. I'll give you one example, General Vich. This is a real life example. I was executive director of the World Bank, as I mentioned, and there was a seminar on judicial reforms which I was asked to chair. And retired chief justices and jurists were called from different parts of the world. It was for developing country. In India, I was represented by a former chief justice. He made so many people made presentation. The Malaysian former chief justice made a presentation. And towards the end, he was very elderly. Towards the end, he said, we also believe in freedom of the judiciary, independent character of the judiciary. And then he kept quiet. I thought that he has fallen sick. But after that pause, he says, but we do not know whether it applies after the judgment has been delivered. You see, this is here that we have been able to maintain the independent character. Judicial orders are respected by all governments. And the way you have seen in recent cases in Uttarakhand, Arunachal Pradesh. You said in US freebies, yes, we also have to do that. And GST will have to do that. That the price of medicine, the price of essential items of food are made tax-free. So that medicine is cheap, basic food items are cheap. You will have to follow that pattern. Otherwise, even if you can't get away with the freebies, as I said, appropriately and at times inappropriately, but never illegally. When you talked about the quality education, I'm worried I am. You know, I'm really worried. I have known this part of India closely, Eastern UP, North Bihar, North Bengal, Brahmaputra Valley, Manipur Valley and beyond. When you walk, when you travel, when you interact with them, the quality of education is so horrible. And I am scared, and which I said technologically unemployable, because they are not connected. Today, all of us present here, we are in a position where we have to learn from our children and grandchildren. And that is the change that is taking place in India. And I call it a civilizational change. Therefore, I have not studied closely General Sahib, the new education policy. I hope once it is finalized, we'll have a look. But more than the policy document, the steps on the ground are necessary. More than 1 lakh schools have one teacher. More than 10 million schools have no proper buildings. I tried. I must tell you this story. I shouldn't say this. I hope now journalists here, then I will not tell this story. Oh yes. Then I will tell you some other time. Yes. I invite some more questions.
Okay. Yeah, you also raise your hand. I'll come to you. I'll come to you later.
Why you are afraid of, sir?
No, because that is a secret. I don't want to violate. You
They
don't
have more
expect
secrets.
secrecy to be violated.
Okay.
So the
Right.
contradiction between this good governance and freebies.
Oh, please.
In answer to your question, although I was looking at that young lady, in answer to your question, I said categorically that we will have to give freebies. Now today we have floods. Today we are having floods. We have to give. I tell you, when I joined service in Assam, as a district officer, Mr. Pathan, I was surprised there was a system that was not in Bihar. Assam, one scarce item, there were so many scarce items at that time, is corrugated iron seats. And that's necessary for building houses, that is necessary for receptions. And the system was that the sub-divisional officer or the deputy commissioner will give to somebody who is having a marriage or any other social function for a period of 10 days or 7 days at no cost. But he has to return, and for that he may have to deposit something. So I tried to understand that phenomenon. It was such a good system. Sometimes 1 or 2 seats got lost or stolen, and the money was, in some cases I waived that. Why I'm saying all this, that but if you give freebies, which means looting the banks, that is not freebies. That is cheating. That is a case of crime. Crimes have to be separated from freebies. illegalities have to be separated from legality.
I'm Commodore Gupta. Sir, you have been the governor of Sikkim, and also you come from Bihar. And from the figures that you quoted about per capita income, I guess, or I surmise that it is 1/4 in Bihar.
Yes.
Could you give some reason why this is so? Because Sikkim doesn't have any great industry, and Bihar is so well endowed. Why this?
Sikkim, I can tell you. Bihar also, I can tell you. But that will be a wrong answer. General Sahib, are you prepared to allow some long answers?
And we'll have another session for that. But
Yes, but I would be happy to narrate to you how Bihar went down and how Sikkim after 1975 went down. And I hinted that if you want good governance, you have to have harmony between democracy, culture and administration. After 1975, Sikkim witnessed it. The result was that literacy rate, which was 16% in 75, now it is 82 plus. Similarly about all these parameters, but there was no clash between cultural forces and democratic forces and governments. They had stability. Bihar, which started with that big change which I mentioned in the revolution, to now, I don't know what is the number of chief ministers. It keeps changing. I don't know about the schools. They are good schools, of course. Bihari boys and girls are the pride. They are in Delhi and they are competing in the All India census, in the banks, everywhere. And this whole belt, Bihar, Orissa and Andhra, constitute 40% of the seats in these. So individually they have the future. But as a collectivity, it has declined. And it has declined because there is no harmony between forces of democracy, culture and administration. That's my large answer between Bihar and Sikkim. That's why I'm thankful to you that you asked the question, but it requires a longish answer. Yes.
okay, at the back.
Yes.
Sir, I want to know that you feel that there are some flaws in the government's communication policy regarding the good governance and the developmental plans, programs. From the government side, whatever the media rules is there, definitely media will do. But you find that some communication flaws, there are some flaws in the policy regarding the communication from the government side.
Good question. Yes, you have a question. I'm sorry I didn't answer your earlier question.
Sir, my question is very simple.
Yes.
We meet, we talk, we create awareness. Whether this awareness reaches those who are to act. My request is that either the BIF or you have been the Honorable Governor of Sikkim, ex-governor in that capacity, would you like to write to Election Commission that the Commission as a whole, full Commission, should write to PM that freebies before election is nothing but electoral corruption and it should be banned, and I am sure he will do it. At my level I am doing, but my institutions are low. If everybody does it, definitely it will make some impact. Freebies, that what you say for floods and other things, they are actually misunderstood if you talk freebies. They are the government aids. And the subsidies, as you say, for medicines, they are really the subsidies for public welfare. They are not freebies. So this freebies, it is a wrong
world, if you talk in those terms for medical subsidies or for flood aids or for sort of aid in the event of big bhujal and others.
I agree with you. I am making a distinction between freebies and subsidies. And I was talking about subsidies when I talk about the earthquake, floods, and medical support. So that was my point. But what you have said is very important. That how do we change the system? I accepted the invitation of the VIF to speak on this subject. I think there is a general reputation that you are heard. Am I wrong? The VIF is heard. So I have told him that I will give him the full text of my speech. He has agreed to print it, and he and I will write to the concerned people based on this. Because I worked very hard on this, you must have noticed. That I will do. I keep also writing, I honestly, and I didn't disclose that secrecy because that was a cabinet. A person at my stature is of my level is not expected to talk loosely in public. But I'm prepared to tell you the story if you come in private under the agreement that you will not print it. Yes.
Yeah, okay. You are the first one to raise your hand, so let's get to you. I'll come to you. Last three questions.
Sir,
Mr. Singh,
my question answers not to me.
What was your question?
Regarding the communication policies of the government, from government side.
Government is under great strain on communication side. And I must tell you that, the government is functioning so openly. Sometimes I feel, should they be so open? When 9/11 happened, I was in Washington, D.C.
No, sir, governments actually, I covered in many ministries.
Yes.
Government do that, make us good policies, but it is the perspectives, not the policies in the newspapers and the media.
No,
That's definitely.
No, they have, I said that the newspapers have their other priorities. Today, these days, even a reputed paper like the Times of India, you have to remove page after page to come to the news. This never happened. So the priorities of the media are also changing. There must be some reasons. I'm not a person who will control the media. I don't want to do that. Although as district magistrate I have done that, which I can't do now. I realize that I can't do that. One day, I must tell you this a story, this is public. I was Deputy Commissioner of Guwahati, and there was a leader, there was some SMEs Bengali attention which gives help. So a public leader who is a friend, she is no more. She made a public statement that she saw CRP Jawans entering into girls' hostel in Guwahati. This is on the bank of Digohi Pukri, if you know Guwahati. And that was the block, threat. And I was told by one of the friends in the media that there will be further riot tomorrow. So newspapers have been printed. Then Assam and Assam Tribune. I phoned up my SP, that was KPS Gill. He said, मैंने तो दाढ़ी उड़ी खोल लिया है, आप जाइए, मैं ऑफिसर भेज रहा हूँ आपके पीछे. He was a great man. I said, जल्दी दाढ़ी वगैरह बांधिए. I went. I had my car and drivers. I called there on the campus, and one was a jeep with 2 or 3 constables. I went. Those days, you had only about Sneeze and English, then Gakhon and Assam Tribune. They had about 75,000 or 80,000 copies. So I put all that in my jeep. Nothing happened. And I told the senior, he said, no, he won't go, sir. But he thought I will arrest him. So he said, I will send He had already phoned the editor, who was Satish Chandra Kakuti. He was a freedom fighter of my father's age. So I went, he came, he was furious. He said, how can you do it? I said, yes, I can't do it. I said, it is illegal. But I'm breaking law for the sake of peace and security of the state. You are a freedom fighter. Do you want houses to be burned tomorrow? You tell. What should I do? I said, I respect you because you went to jail. My father also went to jail almost at the same time. What do you want me to do? He said, will you arrest me? I said, if I have to. What can I do? He cooled down. He saw the logic. And what I did, I said, all these papers will be dropped into your house tonight. So his car followed, the jeep followed, and it was dropped. Not a single paper was circulated, and Guwahati was saved. You have to act with firmness. But media freedom, yes. We respect told him, I have done wrong. But he said, later he realized. He threatened me, but will you arrest me? I said, yes, if I have to. By then Gill had, the formidable Gill came. After all that he came. I said, this matter has been settled. He was very happy. He was very happy. I'm glad that he didn't come earlier. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, Mr. Singh, reservation is quite a heavy freebie. Now, I want to know what is the effect of freebie, reservation as freebie on good governance.
Reservation in services?
Reservation is certainly a very heavy freebie.
In services?
Certainly. And normally it is announced on the eve of elections, say Gujar reservation and this and all that.
Now, how do you...
Now it affects good governance quite to a great extent.
How do you implement Article 38 and 39? Because this was a burden on the framers of the Constitution. And how do you build an equal society? And it was a challenge to the wisdom, to the knowledge, and to the understanding of the freedom leaders. How to go about it. You have to devise ways and means. And in my view, the continuation of that can be challenged. But the initial wisdom was so appropriate. I must tell you a story which is slightly not a direct answer to your question. In late 40s, the communists, not only here, but also in East Bengal, they thought this constitution is wrong. It is an instrument of oppression, and violence is necessary to change it. It started in Andhra. You know what Ambedkar said? Two things he said. He said, I tell the Dalits who are the most oppressed that your answer is constitutionalism, not violence. Otherwise, the country would have gone up in flames. The second thing I tell, and that is again important, that unless you don't generate confidence as well as aspirations, and that was my conclusion. If you can't give somebody employment, give him dignity. That doesn't cost. How can we build a society where we neither give employment nor give dignity? And we say we are the world's largest democracy. And that is what Ambedkar said. Political equality more than economic, social inequality will pull down the system. And he went in another context to a great extreme. He said, I will be the first to burn this constitution. We have to realize these are the facts. But of course, it pinches when you feel that your son, maybe a Chitpavan Brahmin, will not get the job, and somebody's son will get that job. It pinches. Yes, I appreciate that, but not beyond that.
But you are talking about idealistic stage. What is the reality is now it is being misused. This thing is being misused for the political gains. Just like the Patels in the Gujarat, Gujars in the Haryana and Rajasthan. And
I agree with that. I agree with it. That's why I said both institutions and men are important. You had Backward Classes Commission. They didn't, nobody, no newspaper, no magazine said what consideration they gave when they decided to recommend. They were not created to be the, yes men or yes madam system. Unless you don't have institutions. And institutions can be strengthened only when you give them. I'll give you an example. Union Public Service Commission has during the last 70 years maintained a character. And this side in North, more than half of the chairmen of a state public service commission, with the same guarantee, with the same power, had to land in jail, because they went to the private secretary of chief minister to find out whom to appoint, along with the list of before the interviews. You cannot. So both men and institutions are important. If you want to kill an institution, give it to a poor man, poor in that sense, depraved mind. That is important, and you are right. I agree with you. The answer is not the fault is not with the Constitution. And Gonzalo Austin became my friend in Washington. He one day told me that if the Indian Constitution was not good, then India would have collapsed as a democracy. System is there, but institutions and men both are important. Yes.
that is why with the passage of time it is necessary to review each and everything. That was the voice which Babaji raised.
Yes, in fact the Constitution itself suggested review. We are unable to review because of our political weaknesses.
In the simple way,
we will not get
Yes.
debate on it. This is not the time.
No, but this is a good debate, and I agree with you.
but it should take a phase of workshop itself.
Last question.
Hello. Sir, I am from South, so I just have a question on eastern part of India, since you have experience in that part. I can't understand why the resource-rich states like Jharkhand and Bihar are not developing much.
Bihar is not resource-rich.
Okay,
Jharkhand is. Jharkhand is, and I must tell you again, this leads to a story which I can make in public. I was instrumental in devising the formula for separation of the states. I tell you this story. Because they wanted a commission, and the political parties had agreed to have these 3 states. So the Chief Prime Minister, Mr. Bajpayee, had asked me to find out. I went to the cabinet for guidance, and the cabinet had a long chat. Nothing for these. So I was asked to find out a formula. And one night this formula came to my mind, that if the Assembly passes a resolution to bifurcate its own state, then that is a credible basis, which unfortunately was not followed in case of Telangana by the Home Minister, and the Home Minister without his authority did that. That's another matter. So I said, and the cabinet approved. Then what the Prime Minister told me, Mr. Bajpayee, aapne Bihar ko bacha liya. Because the Chief Minister of Bihar said, partition of Bihar over my dead body. Within 10 days he changed his mind. He said partition of Bihar is good. And Bihar was partition. So problem was there. Sri Krishna Sinha, the first chief minister of Bihar, had said that Bihar can progress only with manpower of North Bihar and mineral power of South Bihar would be combined. So all the institutions of technological excellence in his time were set up in Ranchi, Bokaro, Hatia and others. Now you have to have a vision. Without vision, how can you do that? And Jharkhand is suffering. I said in Orissa, and I made a statement which a civil servant should not make in presence of the chief minister. He is no more. I said that it takes a lot of effort to keep Orissa poor. And that is true of Jharkhand. To keep Orissa and Jharkhand downtrodden requires a lot of effort. And we have good governance means lift those efforts, kill those efforts, which keep it down. Bihar is a more complex case. Yes.
Gentlemen, it's a pity that we have to come to the end of this session, but I must thank Sri B.P. Singh for giving such a sort of involved talk, and I'm certain that he would have prepared a lot for it. And for that reason, we will look forward to printing his lecture, what he's given, and I suppose he'll add to that much more.
I would like to share that. Almost every question has given me new perspectives, and I'm grateful to you for it.
Okay, now when we talk of the governance of India, when you translate it, we are 1/6 of the world, I think. So when you are talking about the governance of India, you are talking of the governance virtually of 1/6 of the world, and a very diverse population. Very diverse population. We say our strength is going to be the young people of India, the youth. But then he pointed also out that the quality of education in the country. That is, I think, what worries me as an individual the most is the quality of education, which has gone down by the day. It should have improved, but the quality of education has gone down. And that is what is a matter of great concern. I do hope that the governments will take that into account, and the education policy which is going to be put out shortly. I only hope it doesn't have political coloration, and it is very dispassionate and very sort of rationally done. We've given very good formulas. I like the idea of harmony to be meshed with democracy, culture and administration. I think that will be a great formula to carry from here. And it will be very good if we can really take advantage of this talk. And I am also happy that the speaker was very emphatic about making a distinction between freebies and the subsidies of where they are required. If a state is in a distance, you can't say I will not give you freebies. It can't be called a freebie. So thank you very much, sir. It's a great honor hearing you, and very warm round of applause. Thank you very much once again. May I have the honor of presenting you of a mentor? I'm surprised that you have not been able to give to you. Okay, 1 minute more, please. Answer your question. Thank you.
सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्. ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः.